Good morning, everyone. Please be seated. I have occupied this wooden bench for 35 years. That is 35 years of mornings that began with the same familiar creak as I leaned back into this worn, faded leather. 35 years of listening to the persistent hum of the fluorescent lights above and feeling that very specific heavy silence that descends upon this room the moment the gavel of justice strikes. It is the silence of solemnity, a moment where every breath slows down because everyone in this room understands one fundamental truth. Something of immense consequence is about to unfold. I have never viewed this chair as merely a piece of furniture. To me, it is a sacred vow. It is an ironclad promise made to every single person who walks through those doors that here the law has no ears for flattery, no eyes for black credit cards, and no heart that trembles before prestigious names. In this courtroom, no matter who you are, no matter who your father is, or how many skyscrapers downtown bear your family name, under the unblinking light of justice, we all stand on the exact same ground. Now, I am not a man of anger. The people of this city, those who have stood before me over the last 3 decades, know that Judge Simpson is a man who always searches for the human being hidden inside every case file. I believe in compassion. I believe in second chances. I believe that every person is capable of making a mistake and, more importantly, capable of redemption. But there is something I believe even more strongly. Compassion without accountability is not compassion at all. It is enabling. This morning, March the 13th, 2026, I want to tell you the full story of the case currently sitting on my desk. It is a story whose weight lies not in numbers, but in the sheer, suffocating scale of arrogance. The defendant's name is Julian Alexander Sterling, born October the 20th, 2000, 26 years old. He resides in a multi-million-dollar mansion in the Heights, a place where the lawns are always perfectly manicured and the crushing anxieties of survival never touch the doorstep. Julian is the only son of Senator Richard Sterling, a man whose power can shift legislation and whose influence stretches all the way to the Capitol. A family dynasty with a net worth estimated at over $500 million. But here is what I need the young man sitting at that defense table to understand. I want you to truly hear this, Julian, not just listen to the sound of my voice. Your father's name does not walk into this courtroom with you. His checkbooks do not sit beside you to offer a defense. His political shadow cannot cast a single inch of darkness over this bench. In here, Julian Alexander Sterling, you are simply a human being, a man who made specific choices, and now a man who must answer for them. Let us go back to the afternoon of February the 10th. It was 3 o'clock, exactly when the final bell rings at Oakwood Elementary. Parents were waiting. Children were spilling out of the gates with oversized backpacks, a peaceful scene of everyday life. Suddenly, a bright red Ferrari worth over $300,000 tore through that peace. The recorded speed was 90 miles per hour. I will repeat that, 90 miles per hour in a 15-mile-per-hour school zone. You weren't just driving a car, Julian. You were piloting a 2-ton rocket into the middle of innocent lives. When I look at the crime scene photos, I see the black tire marks burned into the asphalt, the exact spot where, seconds earlier, a child could have been standing. When the police finally pulled you over, instead of remorse, you looked that young officer in the eye and asked a question that reveals the utter rot in your soul. Do you know who my father is? I'll have you picking up trash by tomorrow morning. Julian, look at me. What do you see in my eyes? I see the overconfidence on your face, the way you smirk as your lawyer whispers in your ear. You think this is a game, a minor inconvenience that your father will end with a single phone call. But you are wrong. You are very, very wrong. I want to take a moment to look past the legal terminology. In this courtroom, we often talk about citations, statutes, and velocity. But those are cold words. They are sterile. They don't capture the smell of burning rubber or the sound of a child's scream. To truly understand why we are here today, we have to talk about the human reality of what happened on February the 10th. Imagine Oakwood Elementary at 3:05 p.m. This is a place that should be the safest corner of our world. It is a place of laughter, of parents greeting their children, of crossing guards like Mrs. Elena Vance, who has stood on that corner for 22 years. Mrs. Vance is 68 years old. She wears that neon vest not as a fashion statement, but as a shield for our children. On that afternoon, Mrs. Vance was holding her stop sign high. She was escorting a group of second graders across the street. Among them was a 7-year-old boy named Leo, who was excitedly telling his mother about a drawing he made in class. They were halfway across the crosswalk, the sacred space where the law promises you safety. And then the sound came. Not a hum, but a roar. A $300,000 Ferrari screaming down a residential street at 90 miles per hour. Julian, I have looked at the telemetry from your vehicle's onboard computer. At no point during that block did your foot touch the brake. Not once. You saw the yellow school bus. You saw the neon vest of Mrs. Vance. You saw the children. And yet you chose to maintain a speed that would be dangerous on a professional racetrack, let alone a school zone. Mrs. Vance told the investigators that she didn't have time to think. She only had time to react. She grabbed Leo by his backpack and threw him toward the sidewalk, falling onto the pavement herself as your car missed them by less than 3 feet. 3 feet, Julian. That is the width of a doorway. That is the razor-thin margin between a narrow escape and a funeral that would have broken this entire city's heart. We are not here today because you were unlucky. We are here because we were miraculously, incredibly lucky. But luck is not a legal defense. Luck is not a license to be reckless. When you drove that car at that speed, you were making a statement to every person in Oakwood. You were saying that your thrill, your hurry, and your sense of importance were worth more than the life of that 7-year-old boy. You were saying that the rules of society, the ones that keep us from descending into chaos, simply did not apply to the son of Senator Sterling. I've sat here long enough to know the difference between a mistake and a mindset. A mistake is forgetting to check your blind spot. A mindset is believing that the road belongs to you and everyone else is just an obstacle in your way. When Officer Miller pulled you over, his hands were shaking, not from fear of you, but from the adrenaline of what he had just witnessed. He had almost seen a massacre. And your response? Your response wasn't to ask if the children were okay. It wasn't to apologize for your terrifying lapse in judgment. No. Your response was to reach for the shield of your father's name. Do you know who my father is? Those 7 words are the most disappointing thing I have heard in this chamber in a very long time. They tell me that you don't see yourself as a citizen. You see yourself as an exception. Well, Julian, today the exceptions end. I want you to sit with that image of Leo and Mrs. Vance. I want you to think about the 68-year-old woman who had to throw herself onto the asphalt because you felt like driving fast. We are going to peel back that armor of entitlement layer by layer until we find the conscience that you've buried under your father's influence. Because in this room, Senator Sterling is just a name on a ballot, but Mrs. Vance and Leo, they are the people this court was built to protect. I have debated with myself whether or not I should discuss this publicly. It was not an easy decision. But ultimately, I realized that you, the citizens sitting in this gallery, and everyone watching these proceedings, have an absolute right to know the truth. Justice only remains powerful when it is held under the uncompromising light of transparency. Between August the 20th and September the 5th of this year, my chambers received 7 phone calls regarding this specific case. I received 4 private hand-delivered letters, and 3 individuals came to my office in person to speak with me. These were not common street criminals. These were men of significant status: City Councilman James Patterson, Attorney Michael Breslin of the city's most prestigious firm, and Samuel Rodriguez, the president of the State Chamber of Commerce. Each of them, in their own sophisticated way, suggested the same thing, that perhaps the matter of Julian Sterling could be resolved quietly and discreetly. They argued that the defendant had already learned a very difficult lesson. They mentioned that the Sterling family was prepared to make a significant donation. They used specific figures, ranging from $50,000 to $100,000, to the Providence Youth Foundation or the Police Benevolent Association. They called it a humanitarian resolution to bring this whole chapter to a close. I looked every one of those men in the eye and gave them the same answer. This case will be heard in open court, based strictly on the evidence and the law. No amount of money, no matter how large the sum or how charitable the label, will ever influence what happens inside this room. I also made it very clear that if any further attempts were made to interfere with the administration of justice, I would immediately report those actions to the highest investigative authorities in this state. I am telling you this today not to embarrass these men. They come from a world where they believe that is how things are done, where money and connections are used to erase mistakes. But you need to know that this court stands firm. As long as I am sitting in this chair, the scales of justice will remain completely beyond the reach of money and political influence. The day that a checkbook can dictate a verdict is the day that justice dies in this city. And I promise you, that day has not come, not in this room, and certainly not on my watch. I often think about what might have been. A judge's responsibility is not just to look at the facts of what happened, but to keep the human stakes visible. We are truly, genuinely fortunate that no one was physically harmed during that high-speed rampage. And when I say fortunate, I don't mean it as a figure of speech. I mean that the gap between the scene on February the 10th and a horrific tragedy was not due to the wisdom or caution of the defendant. It was pure unearned luck. Julian, I want you to look at the people sitting in the rows behind you. They are taxpayers, workers, and law-abiding citizens who follow the rules every single day without the protection of a famous name. Did you really think you could use your father's checkbook to buy back their safety? Did you think that the lives of little Leo or Mrs. Vance could be appraised and traded for a donation? The answer is no. The integrity of this court is priceless, and the safety of this community is not a commodity for sale. If you walked in here believing that your father's power would be a shield to protect you from your own actions, you have made the most catastrophic mistake of your life. In this room, justice will be served fairly and fully, no matter who you are. Julian, as I look at you sitting there today, I don't see a man who is terrified of the consequences. I don't see someone trembling at the gravity of the charges against him. Instead, I see a man who is profoundly bored. I've watched you for the last hour. I've seen you checking your gold watch every few minutes. I've seen you adjusting your $5,000 silk tie as if it's the most important thing in this room. I've seen you looking at the exit with an expression of pure annoyance, as if this entire legal proceeding is nothing more than a tedious delay in your social calendar. Your lawyer, Mr. Sterling, has spent the last 20 minutes trying to weave a narrative of potential. He has used academic words like youthful indiscretion, unfortunate lapse, and limitless bright future. He has presented me with your degree from a prestigious university and a stack of letters of recommendation from men whose names are carved into the granite of this city's skyline. He is a silk-tongued orator, and he is doing exactly what he is paid to do. He is trying to dress up your recklessness in the expensive language of privilege. But let us be brutally honest about what is actually happening here. Your defense is asking me to believe that your potential career is more valuable than the lives you nearly extinguished on that afternoon. He is asking me to weigh your future salary and your family's reputation against the bone-deep trauma of a 7-year-old boy and a 68-year-old grandmother. And while he speaks these flowery words, you sit there with that unmistakable smirk. It is the smirk of a man who has spent 26 years being told that he is special. It is the look of someone who has been raised to believe that every person in this room, the bailiff, the court reporter, the police officers, and yes, even the judge behind this bench, is simply an employee he hasn't gotten around to hiring yet. You aren't listening to a legal argument. You are waiting for the bill so your father can pay it and you can leave. When I finally gave you the floor to address the court, I expected a moment of reflection, perhaps a hollow apology, or at least a scripted expression of regret. But you didn't give us an apology. You gave us a lecture. You stood at that podium and spoke about government overreach. You spoke about how the police were harassing a citizen of your standing. You actually had the staggering audacity to suggest that this city should be thanking your father for his tax contributions rather than persecuting his son over a minor traffic matter. Julian, let me be very clear. 90 miles per hour in a school zone is not a traffic matter. It is an act of predatory violence. It is a public declaration that your personal thrill is worth more than the life of every child in that neighborhood. And then you crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. You leaned into that microphone and called this court a theater for the mediocre. You looked me in the eye and told me that I was just a petty civil servant trying to make a name for myself by attacking a lion of the city. You laughed, Julian. You laughed in the face of the law because you believe that because your father can buy a building, you can buy the truth. You believe that because you've never hit a wall that money couldn't melt. This bench is just another hurdle you can jump over. But you are about to learn that the law is not a hurdle, it is the foundation. And when you spit on the foundation, the entire house comes down. You didn't just insult me, you insulted the very idea that fairness exists. And in doing so, you have just signed the warrant for your own awakening. Julian, you called this room a theater for the mediocre. You suggested that the people in this gallery, the officers in this room, and the law itself are beneath you. You've spent your entire life believing that you are the director of every scene and that the world is merely a stage for your desires. But the curtain is about to fall on that performance. And unlike the theater you're used to, there will be no standing ovation when this is over. I have spent the last hour searching for even a sliver of humanity in your posture. I have looked for a single moment where that smirk faltered, a moment where you realized that Mrs. Vance's life has value, or that Leo's mother almost had to bury her only son because of your youthful indiscretion. But I found nothing. Instead, I found a digital trail of your arrogance. My staff has reviewed the videos you posted to your social media account just 2 hours after you nearly killed 2 people. You didn't post a prayer of thanks that no one was hurt. You posted a video mocking Officer Miller. You called him a peon with a badge. You laughed about how your father would buy his precinct just to fire him. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Julian. It tells me that the warning you were given on that street didn't just fall on deaf ears, it was treated as a joke. Mercy is a beautiful thing, Julian. I have extended it thousands of times from this bench. I have given second chances to people who had nothing but the clothes on their backs and a heart full of genuine remorse. But mercy without an acknowledgement of the wrong is not mercy. It is a license to continue. If I let you walk out of here today with a fine that your father can pay without even noticing his bank balance, I am not being a kind judge. I am being an accomplice to your next crime. Because make no mistake, with your mindset, there will be a next time. And next time, we might not be so lucky. Next time, I might be looking at a grieving family instead of a reckless driver. You believe your father is a lion. Perhaps he is. But in this jungle of stone and law, there is only one king, and it is the truth. And the truth is that you are a danger to this community. You are a man who views the lives of others as expendable obstacles to your own convenience. You have insulted this court, you have threatened its officers, and you have treated the safety of our children with total, calculated indifference. The time for speeches is over, Julian. The time for phone calls and quiet arrangements is dead. You came here today expecting a bill. You are going to leave with a reality check. On the charge of reckless driving in a school zone, I am sentencing you to the maximum allowable penalty, 1 year in the county correctional facility. On the charge of attempting to intimidate a law enforcement officer, I am adding an additional 6 months to be served consecutively. And for your conduct in this courtroom today, for your theater for the mediocre, and your utter contempt for these proceedings, I am holding you in summary contempt of court and adding another 90 days. Bailiff, please stand. Julian, look at your hands. I want you to feel the weight of what is about to happen. Your father cannot take these minutes back for you. His money cannot serve this time for you. You are no longer an exception. You are a prisoner of the state of Rhode Island. Bailiff, take him into custody. Now, the first click, that cold, sharp, metallic sound of the first handcuff closing around Julian's wrist. It is a sound that cannot be ignored, and it is a sound that all the money in the world cannot silence. I watched the color drain from your face in that exact moment, Julian. I watched that smirk, the one you've worn like indestructible armor for 26 years, finally shatter into 1,000 pieces. For the first time in your life, you weren't looking at a petty civil servant. You were looking at the cold, hard end of your freedom. The bailiff didn't hesitate. He didn't care about the labels on your silk suit or the fact that your father is a lion of the city. To him, in this professional moment, you are not a Sterling. You are simply a defendant who has been remanded to custody. As the second cuff clicked into place, your head snapped back toward the gallery, searching for your father. You were looking for the man who has spent your entire life erasing your mistakes with a signature and a handshake. You were looking for the magic phone call that would make the steel on your wrists vanish. But Senator Richard Sterling didn't stand up. He didn't shout. He didn't point a finger. For all his political might, even he knows that in this room, on this day, his influence has reached a wall it cannot climb. I saw him lower his head. I saw the weight of 30 years of political battles suddenly look light compared to the weight of failing as a father. Perhaps he realized in that silence that by protecting you from every minor consequence since you were a child, he didn't actually help you, he handicapped you. He sent you out into a world without a moral compass, convinced that the rules of society were just polite suggestions for people with less money than your family. As the bailiff began to lead you away, your expensive Italian leather shoes scuffed against the floor. It was a clumsy, desperate sound. You tried to pull back just for a second, a reflex of someone who has never been told no and meant it. You opened your mouth to say something, perhaps another threat, another reminder of your status, but the words died in your throat. The reality of the situation is finally heavier than your ego. You are no longer a lion of the city. You are an inmate. You are headed to a facility where the walls are made of gray concrete and the schedules are set by a warden, not by your whims or your social calendar. I looked over at Mrs. Vance in the second row. She wasn't cheering. She wasn't celebrating your downfall with a smile. She simply closed her eyes and took a long, shaky breath. It was the breath of a woman who can finally sleep tonight knowing that the man who nearly ended her life and the life of little Leo is being held accountable by something bigger than himself. That is what true justice looks like, Julian. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about getting back at the wealthy. It's about restoring the balance of safety in a community that you treated like your personal high-speed playground. The iron doors at the side of the courtroom are heavy. They make a hollow thudding sound when they close, a sound you will hear in your dreams for the next 18 months. It is the sound of a chapter ending. You walked through those doors in cuffs, leaving behind the world of five-star restaurants and private jets, and entering a world where your inmate number is the only thing that matters. This is the theater you mocked, Julian, but this isn't a play. This is the real world. And in the real world, actions have consequences that even a senator's bank account cannot buy back. I want you to feel the cold of that steel on your skin as you sit in the holding cell. I want you to realize that for the next 500 days, your name will not get you a better meal or a softer bed. I am not doing this to destroy your life. I am doing this to save it. I am doing this to stop you before you become a man who eventually kills someone and walks away without a single scratch on his conscience. 18 months is a long time. Use it to find out who you are when you don't have a Ferrari to hide behind. I want to address the parents in this room, and specifically those who are watching from their homes, perhaps wondering how a young man with every possible advantage could end up in a pair of steel handcuffs. I am not here to stand in judgment of Senator Richard Sterling or his wife as parents in their private home. I don't know the quiet conversations that happen behind the gates of their mansion, but I will say this to every mother and father listening. There is a dangerous, invisible line between protecting your child and depriving them of the very thing they need to survive the real world. That thing is consequence. When we shield our children from every minor friction, when we use our influence to erase their mistakes, or when we make a phone call to fix a situation that they created, we are not loving them. We are handicapping them. We are sending them into a world that will eventually stop accommodating them. and they will be utterly defenseless because they have no internal compass for accountability. Julian's tragedy began long before he drove 90 miles per hour through that school zone. It began every time he was told that his name was a shield. It began every time he saw that rules were for the peons and that his family was the exception. If you teach your child that they are a lion and everyone else is prey, do not be surprised when they start acting like a predator. By removing every obstacle and every penalty, you aren't protecting your child. You are making them more vulnerable to the day when the world finally says no and means it. I look at Senator Sterling now, and I see a man who would likely trade his entire political career to go back 10 years and let his son fail a little more often. I would have been heartbroken if my own child had spoken to an officer the way Julian did, not because of the jail time, but because of the character it revealed. To the parents out there, teach your children that respect is the only currency that never devalues. Teach them that the law is not a suggestion for the poor, but a covenant for us all. If you don't teach them the meaning of the word responsibility, then eventually someone like me will have to do it for you. And I promise you, the lesson from this bench is much colder and much more expensive than the one they could have learned at your dinner table. And we must ask ourselves what kind of community we are building. Are we building a city where your safety depends on who is behind the wheel, or a city where the law is a roof that covers us all equally? Today, we chose the roof. We chose to say that the life of a crossing guard and the future of a 7-year-old boy are worth more than the pride of a dynasty. That is the only way a society survives. I have spent the better part of my life in this room. Since the early 90s, I have watched the world outside these windows change in ways I never could have imagined. I have seen technology transform how we speak, how we work, and how we perceive the truth. But inside these four walls, time moves differently. Inside this room, the values we hold dear, dignity, accountability, and fairness, remain as unyielding as the stone pillars of this building. In 35 years, I have sentenced people who had absolutely nothing and people who had everything. I have shown mercy to veterans who were struggling with the invisible scars of war. I have given second chances to teenagers who were lost and looking for a way home. I have reduced fines for elderly citizens who made honest, heartbreaking mistakes while trying to survive on a fixed income. And today, I have imposed one of the most serious sentences I have the authority to give on a 26-year-old man who, by every external measure, had every advantage a human being could ask for. The common thread running through every one of those thousands of decisions is the same. The law is the great equalizer. Justice is not weighed by the size of your bank account, the prestige of your family name, or the number of powerful phone calls your father can make in the middle of the night. It is weighed on the evidence. It is weighed on what actually happened on that street. And most importantly, it is weighed on what this community requires for its protection. And this court does not belong to the Sterlings. It does not belong to the politicians or the lions of the city. This court belongs to the people of Providence. It belongs to Mrs. Vance, who stands on that street corner in the heat and the cold to keep our children safe. It belongs to little Leo, who deserves to walk across the street without being hunted by a $300,000 Ferrari. It belongs to Officer Miller, who puts on that uniform every morning and does his job with dignity, even when someone laughs in his face. This court exists to tell you that you matter, to tell you that your safety matters, to tell you that your lives are not expendable obstacles for the wealthy and the entitled. No amount of money or influence will ever change that fundamental truth as long as I am breathing. To those watching at home, I want you to carry this thought with you. A community is only as strong as its commitment to one another. When we allow one person to believe they are above the rules, we weaken the foundation for everyone. But when we stand together and say that the law applies to the senator's son just as it applies to the shopkeeper's daughter, we build something that can last for generations. The defendant, Julian Alexander Sterling, is remanded to custody. Something good will come from this, not through the fine, but through the realization that in this city, no one is untouchable. Bailiff, please proceed. This court is adjourned.